I understand that the White House is working and allies are working to make this meeting happen, but did Putin promise to do a meeting with Zelensky, a direct meeting, in the coming weeks?
He has.
Wow, that surprised me. I never thought I'd hear that. And now it's confirmed. You know, I heard them talking about it, that this was going to happen, and now we finally have a confirmation that, yes, indeed, Putin, at least through the White House press secretary, said he has agreed to that. Welcome to Deep Dive, everybody. Patrick Henningsen, you see, host of Sunday Wire, patrickhenningsen.substack.com, geopolitical analyst extraordinaire. Love to have you, brother. Welcome.
It's great to be with you, Gary.
Does that surprise you, Patrick? Did that struck me that, oh yeah, he's agreed to do it already?
It not really. I'm not convinced that Russia's agreed to anything, quite frankly. If it's coming out of the White House press secretary, to me, it's not credible, because they do everything in such a fluid, impromptu way, and the goalposts are just moving every day on any of these types of statements or confirmations about stuff. It's so much of this stuff has been walked back or just kind of ignored in the last 6-7 months. That I'm not convinced that that's the case. I can't personally see why Russia would agree to meet with Zelensky at all, unless it's a signing ceremony.
Right.
And so, are they going to have something ready to sign? Definitely not. So I just can't see that happening. That's definitely not to Russia's advantage to come down to the level of Zelensky.
Well, you remember, I think it was in January or February, it was this year, where Putin basically said, listen, he's illegitimate leader. He has no authority to sign anything. So why would I sit down and talk to somebody who doesn't even have that authority?
Yeah. I mean, when he meets European leaders, granted, they're elected, maybe not by much, Macron or Starmer, but they're elected. He's not a statesman. He's not a legitimate president. He's out of mandate. And his administration, his government is extremely precarious. And the amount of documented corruption is just like off the charts. Plus, he's basically running his country into the ground in a proxy war that I think a lot of sensible people can agree is bad for Ukraine or what's left of it. Why would Vladimir Putin, who is a hugely popular president in Russia, arguably the most successful politician of the last 100 years, you could say, is pretty successful globally, and he's really coming down a level to meet with Zelensky. I mean, and again, that would have to be some kind of a signing ceremony. And absent details, I can't see that as a credible, thing. So, but you look at how the U.S. press is running around after all these breadcrumbs. I mean, they'll take anything for a headline now.
Right.
I think the headline in the New York Times was, Europe and Zelensky, big win by getting an audience with Trump so quickly after the Putin meeting. They're like celebrating this like this is some kind of victory or some kind of achievement, or that they've gained something, and that Trump will talk about security guarantees. They're celebrating the fact that Trump will talk about security guarantees, which we all know are impossible.
Right. We've got some of that. Well, the chickens have already hatched, so they're counting them, Patrick. That's what's going on. It's too good to not count them now.
Yeah. So the press are just so eager to celebrate, or to put it. To me, it's kind of baffling because this is the same press that wanted to put Donald Trump away forever, not so long ago, and that said he was basically a Russian agent, a crypto Russian asset, for the longest time, and they're not tearing strips off him over this stuff because there's nothing real here. Like all the national security correspondents, they're and even the majors, like CNN, ABC, they're kind of handling Trump with kid gloves on this, and I'd be pressuring them, asking for specifics.
Yeah,
but they're not doing it.
No, they're not. Well, you know what? I mean, Patrick, it's hard to argue with these optics, right? Especially starting on Friday. Well, it started, but you know what I mean. What started to really snowball here is what happened in Alaska and the optics there in Alaska, and then within 2 days, 3 days, the optics yesterday at the White House with all of the world gathering in the White House.
Yeah, great optics, right? Good for Trump. In the short term.
Right.
Short term, good for Trump. Both good for Trump. I would say, my take on the Alaska meeting is optics, good for Trump, good for Russia.
I thought so too.
Good for Russia. Good for the world to see Russia and the U.S. with their teams facing each other. That's good. That's good. Is anything productive going to come out of it that's going to change the situation in Ukraine or, bring this war to an end in the short term? I'm not convinced that it will, but it's good. However, the scene in Washington is good for Trump because he's wielding the power over the Europeans. Right. They're groveling for security guarantees, and Zelensky's there. He forced Zelensky to wear a coat. I mean, did you see that?
Of course.
That's something. I mean, but it's, again, that's not going to achieve much. In fact, those people, I hope Trump understands the European mentality. Okay. The backstabbing European mentality, and the petty rivalries, political rivalries, and petty dynasties that are in European politics, and they could really sabotage anything that Trump ever agreed to or was advancing down the field on this. So I have said this a number of times, and it's important to underline the fact that no matter what agreement the Russians and the Americans come to, in this case Putin and Trump, or Russia and the Trump administration, that there is nothing to guarantee that won't be undermined, derailed, or just completely outright sabotaged by any of these European countries, collectively or individually, with the UK and Germany at the front of the line on that one. And then there's nothing to guarantee that Ukraine will ever agree on anything. And Zelensky specifically. So
yeah, I have some video. I have some video. I think illustrating that perfectly what you're saying here.
President Zelensky, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. That today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support, American and European partners, and we will do our best for this. So, and I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, of personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war, and we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
I know it's sometimes hard to hear exactly what goes on, but the question was, he asked him specifically, are you, President Zelensky, willing to keep sending your men in to die the way you have been over the last 3 years? And you saw how we answered that. Doesn't that not illustrate exactly what you were saying, Pat?
Yeah, he didn't even bother to answer the question. He just deflected to, we're under attack by the Russians and they're killing our babies. And, Zelensky is an actor. That's his stock in trade. And he's playing the role of a lifetime. He's playing one of the greatest roles, theatrical roles in the history of the world, of the modern era. And the role he's playing is Ukraine is the eternal victim, and had nothing to do with this phase of the conflict, which began in February of 2022. Nothing to do with Ukraine, and certainly nothing to do with NATO. That it's all on Putin's shoulders, and the Russians are just inherently evil, and they just love killing Ukrainians. And that's been the party line in Ukraine with Zelensky. That's been the party line throughout Europe. And that was Biden administration. That was their party line as well. And Trump's kind of just adapted that talking point. And Trump's talking point, which is funny, it's been adopted by the Europeans this week. We need to stop the killing. Stop the killing. It's killing each other. It says Trump. And then von der Leyen just parroting that, just today or yesterday.
Right.
And so it's because that's a nice little clean, handy talking point. It makes you seem like you are trying to steer the ship in a moral direction. And you just, that you're really anti-war and you want to see this war come to an end, but not on Russia's terms, you see. So that's one of the talking, but there's a few other talking points that were injected recently this week.
Really, it's almost like it's a crutch that they rely upon,
Yes.
when the heat gets hot.
Yes.
They go back to that because they look
the other
heroic
one,
when they bring that up.
Yeah, that one is, that's funny it's funny how they're parroting Trump's talking points in Europe. I find that to be fascinating, as if they don't have, they can't outgun Trump intellectually. The European leaders, I mean, that's something. But in terms of strategic or political talking points, one of the new terms that's been injected that everybody seems to be parroting like a bunch of magpies is security guarantees.
Yeah.
Security guarantees. We need security guarantees. We're coming to Washington to talk about security guarantees. Well, and then they've adapted that to Article 5 style security guarantees. So so that they're already hedging that part of this agreement is going to have to be, it's a non-negotiable, it's a red line for Russia, is NATO membership for Ukraine going forward.
Right.
So but they still want to give that Article 5 tripwire. In their mind, anyway, they think this can work. The Article 5 tripwire that will tripwire World War III if so much as a Russian toe cap lands in a European, over a European border, or that if there's some type of deal where U.S. troops get hit or are in harm's way in Ukraine, that's going to trigger another round of war, basically. I mean, it's just insane, like, projectionism that's going on.
Yeah, it is, and I want to get into the verbal gymnastics that they're getting into now. That they've actually cornered themselves into this. Let me play. This is a Trump from this morning, so he's on the phone on Fox News.
They're not going to be a part of NATO, but we've got the European nations, and they'll front load it, and they'll have some of them, France and Germany, a couple of them, UK. They want to have boots on the ground. Not in. I don't think it's going to be a problem, to be honest with you. I think Putin is tired of it. I think they're all tired of it. But you never know. We're going to find out about President Putin in the next couple of weeks.
So, Patrick, it's like faux NATO. So, no, they're not going to be in NATO, but, kind of we can work it so that they're kind of in NATO. What? And then he says, I think Putin's going to go along with it. I think he's tired. You think he's tired, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, we should just listen to Donald Trump because he's the inside man. He knows what's going on. He's gotten into the mind of Putin, and I think we can finally trust Trump that he is an oracle of truth after all these years. So, I mean, why doubt Donald Trump? Anything that he's any throwaway comments on Fox and Friends, we should really be taking notes. No, it is as ridiculous as Trump threatening secondary sanctions against people trading with Russia. You remember that was a red line he drew a couple weeks ago, and he even threw a deadline on it. And I don't hear him talking about that now. So he's totally abandoned that position. Why? Because it's impossible. Because you're not going to declare economic war in India and China. Forget it. It's not going to happen. It's an idle threat. What does that tell you? It tells you the U.S. has run out of cards to play. They've run out of cards to play. And on the economic warfare front with Russia, I mean, how much more can you sanction Russia? You can't. Secondary sanctions? No, forget it. It's like enough damage has been done between the tariff wars with the U.S. and all of their allies that, and I would say China, the U.S. has relations with China. They have diplomatic channels open. They do trade with China. So China is an ally. China is not an enemy. Technically, China is an ally.
Right. So,
but they would turn them into something else if they try to turn the screws on secondary sanctions. Right. So it's not going to happen. So Trump just basically is kind of probably embarrassed or is having to retreat from this position of secondary sanctions. But I think I think the Alaska meeting bailed him out a little bit.
Oh, I think so too.
on that.
Yeah. If nothing else, it gives him more cover. Listen, I've done everything I possibly could have done. How can you blame me at this point in time, right? And, rightfully so. Listen, I think, I give him credit for having that meeting and having the meeting he had yesterday. He's at least stirring the pot. And I was glad to hear you say, right off the bat, listen, we've got to give him credit that he's actually conversing. They are getting face to face. My gosh, what insanity for not sitting down for so many years beforehand with the previous administration. What a shame, what a blemish, what a black eye that is on us, I think,
I do detect I've detected tonal change in Trump. It is a slightly more serious Trump, a slightly more focused Trump on this. I don't see a lot of the content, that it's not really, I don't see more, say, articulation per se on policies, but the fact that he is talking about ditching the European Ukrainian ceasefire demand as a precursor to peace talks, and the fact he's reversed.
Yeah.
All of us would obviously prefer an immediate ceasefire while we work on a lasting peace, and maybe something like that could happen. As of this moment, it's not happening, but President Zelensky and President Putin can talk a little bit more about that. In the 6 or so wars that we stopped, we haven't had a ceasefire, and so I don't know that it's necessary. You can do it through the war, but it would be, I like the ceasefire from another standpoint. You immediately stop.
And to be honest, we all would like to see a ceasefire, the latest from the next meeting on. I can't imagine that the next meeting would take place without a ceasefire. So let's work on that, and let's try to put pressure on Russia, because the credibility of these efforts we are undertaking today, are depending on at least a ceasefire from the beginning of the serious negotiations from next step on. So I would like to emphasize this aspect and would like to see a ceasefire from the next meeting, which should be a trilateral meeting wherever it takes place.
Well, we're going to let the president go over and talk to the president, and we'll see how that works out. And if we can do that, I will say, and again I say it, in the 6 wars that I've settled, I haven't had a ceasefire.
2 different times he was pressed on it, and both times he said, well, maybe we could, but I don't think we have to do it. So I got to give him credit for that.
Someone must have sat him down and told him, "Look, you can't have the cart before the horse," and he got it.
And he listened. He
listened. Clearly, that's a change. That's a change. If anything, that is a fundamental change that I think is hugely positive.
Huge for him.
For him, it's good. However, bad for the United States. Yeah. As a hegemon, because what you have to pay attention to the shift in Alaska, and most people will not pick this up, but it was pretty obvious that everybody was there because they're there to see what Russia would accept. It's very subtle.
Good point.
That is a power dynamic,
and that's still what's at stake and what's in place. That
as opposed to what the U.S. would accept, or what NATO would or Zelensky. Yeah. No, it's what Russia would accept. That is a fundamental shift in the power dynamic that is now manifest. It's clear that we saw it there. And in terms of Trump's ceding ground on that ceasefire issue is a big step there. But Indeed. What it means is that from here on out, unless things go back and get chaotic again, which it could, that Russia is dictating the pace, yes. officially dictating the pace of activity, and political, military, and otherwise. So that is something that I think if the Europeans can't see that, European leaders, and really understand what's going on, then, or they're just wishing, they're hoping in their mind that, well, this might be a bad time for Ukraine and us right now, but we can turn the tables in a couple of months when we get the next weapons in from the U.S., and new ATACMS and whatever wonder weapons they've got up their sleeve, that they're talking to each other, thinking that they can still pull this off. We can still conscript a few more Ukrainians, and so forth. You know, I have to tell you, Gary. Okay, I spoke to people in the military, even at the military intelligence level in NATO. Okay, and they said to me that Russia is doing human waves, what they call meat waves of soldiers, throwing human waves of soldiers at the Ukrainian gunfire. And that's unsustainable, and Putin's illegitimate, and Russia doesn't know how to fight wars. This is, you know, these are not like, you know, it's officer level. Okay, that shocked me. So I'm like, are there people that are really that far out of the loop that believe this stuff? And if so, Gary, what does that mean in terms of who's informing the politicians?
Right. And
I'm like,
you know, if that was really their strategy, if that was Putin's strategy, wouldn't you think that they, with all the men and the manpower that they had, that they would be a little bit further along in this war if that was the dynamic at play?
yeah, that Ukraine would be further along.
Right.
But they're not. Ukraine's losing ground and positions, and it's clearly Russia's in the ascendancy on the battlefield. And so, I mean, it does shock me, and I'm thinking we might be in a propaganda bubble here in the West that's much bigger than we even realize. You and I aren't in it, Gary, and Daniel, and our colleagues in this end of the media. But a lot of people in the mainstream and in politics in the West, they are stuck in that bubble.
Right. And that's what I think is going on right now. In fact, that's specifically, getting back to this, these security guarantees, all the subtleties that are weaving in and out, and the fluidity of how they're explaining things, and what is this going to look like? No, they're not going into NATO, but we're gonna gear up and provide them all the military power that they could possibly need, as if they were in NATO. So here's one of the other qualifications that he has two qualifications. Here's one of them that Trump made an announcement with, again, this morning on the phone.
What kind of assurances do you feel like you have that going forward and, past this Trump administration, it won't be American boots on the ground defending that border?
Well, you have my assurance, I'm president, and I'm just trying to stop people from being killed.
Okay, we've got that assurance. We've got one assurance: no boots on the ground. But it doesn't get better, Patrick. He went on further in this interview, and they added this other element.
When it comes to security, they're willing to put people on the ground. We're willing to help them with things, especially probably if you could talk about by air, because nobody has the kind of stuff we have. Really, they don't have. But I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think if a deal is made, famous last words, right? But I think if a deal is made, I think Russia's had it. They've all had it. And for a very extended period of time, I don't think there'll be a problem. But there'll be some form of security. It can't be NATO, because that's just not something that would ever happen. They couldn't do that.
There's so much in there. So we're going to provide the air power. We'll bomb the hell out of them, and that won't be a problem. But don't worry anyway, because listen, Putin's tired. He's tired, Pat.
Yeah, he wants the out. Putin wants to see the end of this. I mean, it's just Trump saying these things, and you really can't attack. It's sad because a lot of, at least a lot of the MAGA base will believe when the president is saying something there that's somewhat true. But he's not just winging it. But I have a newsflash for everybody. He's winging it. He has been winging it since the beginning, and he continues to wing it. And again, we give credit to Trump when he does things that are good, what look like they're productive things, and looks like he's turning the corner on some important parts of this situation issue. But I'm still going to be very critical, and so he's shallow in terms of how he's characterizing the situation, the conflict, Russia's views. He's probably ascribing things to Putin that Putin didn't say or agree to. I think we should understand that. Yeah. But poor Charlie Hurt, and like these people at Fox are just totally hopeless. They're throwing these empty questions, these vapid softball questions at the president, and the president's giving him equally, shallow answers back. Mm-hmm. and they're not pushing back. They're just happy to be talking to the president,
Well, yeah.
and that's America right there.
Well,
in
they
a
did get
nutshell.
him no boots on the ground. I was happy to hear that.
But then he said boots. Then he'll talk about boots on the ground in the next interview, on either another show on Fox or another segment.
Yeah.
He'll talk about American boots on the ground or something. He's constantly. I think Trump's like always throwing stuff out there to see what reactions
See
are.
what sticks.
See what sticks. See if it's got purchase or not. And so he's constantly doing that. If you understand Trump and you understand his, that's the way he uses the political arena in the media to do sort of straw polling on the fly, then it kind of makes sense. But most people don't look at Trump that way. They actually think he's a president that's saying something, and that something has weight.
Yeah.
And other world leaders, and I think some people are finally catching on to the fact that no, it doesn't really have any weight to it. He's just saying it.
But Patrick, explain it to me. There's maybe something I don't see. I don't get where anybody at the table yesterday, go down the list, all those leaders there, the subtle turning of, well, they're not going to be in NATO. But don't worry, we're going to have boots on the ground from England, from Paris. We're going to send our men there. And if they can't do it, well, don't worry, we'll be in the air on top of it all. And that Putin, yeah, he'll be okay with that. I mean, that's what we're going to propose to him. He's tired and he's going to take this. In what world is Putin, do they think that he's actually going to be good with that?
That's Trump really projecting there, that Russia's desperate to get out of this war, and Russia's already calibrated this is going to be a long conflict, that some of these border issues and some of these enclaves are not going to be resolved for 10, 15, or 20 years or 50 years. But because it's an existential issue for the Russian Federation, i.e. NATO expansion eastward and threats to Russia's borders, statements by Americans and high-profile EU officials about breaking Russia up into 10 different countries and regime change in Moscow. So this isn't like fanciful talk. This is pretty consistent. You're hearing it in high places in both America and Europe. So for Russia, it's an existential issue. So Russia has security concerns, and that's at the top of their demands and top of their list for any negotiated settlement. The question is the U.S. or does Donald Trump take that seriously? Does he take seriously the lapsed missile agreements that have all expired or have been just disintegrated, like the ABM, the INF treaty, and all the other missile agreements, and how serious that is to Russian and European? It should be serious for Europe because they're probably going to bear the brunt of any thermonuclear or tactical nuclear exchange between NATO and Russia. I mean, but they don't seem to be concerned about that because it's almost like they know they've got this controlled. What we might call that they can turn this into a low intensity, long term conflict. Right. That they can get it into that, and then they can all profit from the remilitarization of Europe using Ukraine as the catalyst, including arming of the Arctic, by the way, which is hugely lucrative for all parties participating. And it's almost like this is a very cynical game being played by European elites and big industry and the military-industrial complex internationally. And that we're seeing a lot of tossing back and forth, a lot of play acting in terms of who's really serious about a negotiated settlement for Russia, and zero respect for Russia. Of course, that's par for the course. Who cares about what Putin's concerns are? We're going to dictate the terms of the deal, but they can't because Europe is a paper tiger. NATO is a paper tiger in terms of what it can do militarily, because if it really was formidable as a collective defense or offensive force, they probably would have done something by now or would have already moved into Ukraine and told Russia, well, what are you going to do about it now? We just put 30,000 troops in Lviv and Kiev, and what you're not coming over the Dnieper River now, but that's not happened. What does that tell you? That the Europeans do not have the spine for a war against Russia. So they're quite happy for Ukraine to make all these huge sacrifices in terms of their population and their economy and the brain drain and loss of territory. They're quite happy for Ukraine to do that. because they're making money out of that. I mean, if they weren't making money and it didn't make the European stock market hum, this war is really making defense stocks hum, then they wouldn't be doing it. So it's not for democracy. It's not for Zelensky. It's not for the glory of Ukraine. And it's not really to smite Putin. It's because this is an existential war for NATO. And for the EU too. This is everything about, what they might call New Europe is all bundled and wound up in this conflict. And if they're perceived to lose, not just lose on the battlefield, but even thought that Russia has won this, that really delegitimizes NATO, Brussels, and this whole idea of a modern Europe that's buttressed by this collective defense alliance. It just all falls apart at that point. So for them, politically, it's existential. For Russia, it's physically existential.
Right. Yeah, rather than just ideologically.
Yeah.
Hey, you touched upon the militarization. I know you've been covering that and getting into that. Could you just illuminate all of us as to what's going on there? I think you're not an expert. Well, you might be an expert, but I just want to hear about what you know about that.
I would like to be more of an expert on it, but I have followed it pretty closely, and I don't think enough people are, and I think they should. And it's for this simple reason, and this obviously makes a lot more sense when you consider Donald Trump's big push for Greenland. You remember at the beginning of Trump's term, so that's tied up into the arming of the Arctic. Okay, now if you listen to the statements by J.D. Vance and some of these people in Trump's orbit, Europe needs to defend itself, and we want to take a backseat to NATO and all this other stuff. Okay, I don't believe any of it. Okay, they might be posturing that way now, but if that were the case, why is the United States building 47 bases in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark, in Scandinavia? 47 military bases and facilities. Okay, that's just Scandinavia. Okay, now let's talk about the Arctic. The mass deployment of heavy assets to patrol the Arctic region. This is patrolling, surveillance, submarine warfare, anti-submarine warfare, all sorts of the top of the range, AWACS, air patrol, all of this. And so the money, what does that tell you? The money is going into the Arctic. The money is going into Scandinavia. The investment, this all stuff costs money. Okay. So I don't see the United States retreating, because the money is going in that direction. So what does that tell you? They're gearing up for the future, that the Northern Passage is seen as a threat potentially to U.S. and European hegemony. And because that's becoming the most practical trading route for China and Russia and the Far East, full stop. And so they want to control that node, just like the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, the Horn of Africa, and South China Sea, and all these key waterways. That the Arctic becomes an extension of the Baltic Sea in that sense.
Patrick, and they're not making it a talking point. I mean, it's not like you hear them touting this from the Oval Office.
No, and there's also the rare earth mineral potential, which is on the seabed of the Arctic. So on the seabed of the Arctic. Now, what's interesting about this, and obviously what I'm going to say might upset some people, especially on the left, that are big proponents of climate change, the threat of climate change. That this is really interesting how this Arctic, the arming of the Arctic, is tethered to the climate issue, because the argument is, and it's a quasi-scientific argument that's not completely baked yet, which is that because the polar ice caps are melting in the North Pole, and that's going to basically open up unfettered sea and military travel, and it's going to increase the security and resource competition in that region. And so, we need to be there to basically counter what Russia and China are doing and what they plan to do. And it's all based on this climate change narrative, which means that it's going to melt. That's going to be, all year round fluid passage through the Arctic, and that's going to transform geopolitics globally. Now, that might very well be the case at some point in the future, but that's not the case now. But they're talking about it that's exactly what's happening now.
Tomorrow.
That the Arctic is ice free. It's not ice free. It's certainly not ice free in the fall, winter, and spring. Okay, and their definition of ice free, and this is interesting. The scientific definition they're going on for ice free is I think less than 1 million square miles of ice is technically ice free by their metric. Okay. So we're having a very arbitrary conversation here on the scientific side, but it just shows you the power of the climate narrative, that it's being used to advance the militarization of this whole area.
What a perfect marriage that is, right?
That's how it's going.
Right.
And the Europeans, are all on board with this because they're all on board with the climate conversation, obviously. Less so with the Trump administration. Donald Trump's interest and the U.S. interest in the Arctic, as was is their interest in Greenland, is basically dominating that section of the globe. And whether that's going to be done by the United States or the U.S. with NATO together, in terms of great power competition, it's a huge priority. Because even if the Arctic isn't ice free, that's still the new superhighway for commerce and defense. Is that Northern Passage?
Wow, that's fascinating.
Right, and when I say that passage, I'm talking about from Vladivostok through the Bering Straits, and then across the northern coast of Russia, the waterways along Russia, and then over Scandinavia, and then down into the Atlantic. That's the waterway. And China is increasingly looking at this as going to be one of their main thoroughfares for global trade.
Understood. Man, thanks for that, because that's something I'm not hip to, and you're helping us all by that explanation. Circling back to these upcoming talks, negotiations, let's just take a look at what the reaction is in Russia. We have a little bit of sound from Lavrov just actually earlier today.
Президент Трамп и его команда, особенно после встречи на Аляске, гораздо глубже стали подходить к урегулированию этого кризиса, понимая, что необходимо устранить первопричины, о чем мы, президент Путин, постоянно говорили. И одна из этих первопричин как раз проблема безопасности России, связанная с тем, что грубейшим образом в течение десятилетий последовательно нарушались дававшиеся нам обязательства не допустить расширения НАТО на восток. Президент отмечал несколько раз о том, что после этих обещаний было 5 волн расширения НАТО.
Patrick, that was interesting to me because Lavrov says in that piece, Trump understands the necessity to eliminate the root causes. Now, and that's since the Alaska meeting. So now he understands to eliminate them. Boy, you wouldn't think so from hearing what he said coming out, what he said yesterday. You wouldn't think he does really understand it. Now, I don't know if Lavrov heard what he said yesterday, but for him to come out and say that, and then maybe it's just, just diplomatic cover, and it's hard to explain it and be the man about diplomacy. So I understand that. But boy, oh boy, it sure does not seem that he understands that the importance of eliminating the root causes by what his words are now.
No, I think you're right there, Gary. I think it is diplomatic cover. I think Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, is being, gracious. He's being generous to Trump, and the Russians are pragmatic. They're not going to. They want to encourage Donald Trump to go in the right direction, even if he flips next week. Russia's always, and stubbornly so, had an open door policy, and something that really frustrates the hawks in Russia.
Yeah, indeed.
An open door diplomatic. No matter how things get, that door is always open. But that is the Russian way, and it's always going to be like that. They even have the same policy with Ukraine. Believe it or not, as bad as things are with Ukraine, that door is always open for Ukraine. And whether they're going to take advantage of that is another matter. But when you're talking about the root causes, why this is essential, and why it's essential for, I think, the U.S. to grasp it, but more importantly for the Europeans to find the smelling salts on this, is because there can be no political settlement at all. If the parties that are negotiating, main party being Russia, and whoever is, across the table, whether it's Ukraine, Europe, or America, if they don't agree on how they got there, like what were the things that brought us to the conflict, if they can't agree and acknowledge these realities, then there's no chance for a political settlement. Zero. It's not going to happen. Russia's not going to say, "Oh, yeah, forget about all that from the Maidan and to shelling of the Donbass and the 14,000 dead and all the rest of the stuff. Forget about that. A NATO enlargement, it's not a problem. We just so tired of fighting. We just want peace. Give us a deal." It's not going to happen. You can't have so the causes, what they call the root causes, are completely tied to any chance of a political settlement. Period. End of story. There's no way around it. There's no amount of mental gymnastics they can play in media gymnastics to get around that hard truth. Russia knows that, and all they're doing is waiting for them to come to the table to talk real. And until that, and Donald Trump's kind of, made a one step forward in Alaska by acknowledging this ceasefire is ridiculous, and to get straight to negotiations and a political negotiated settlement. That's a good first step, definitely. But it's going to take more than that going forward. The particulars on this are particularly important because a lot of these, the NATO membership, of course, is a huge pillar. It seems like there's an acknowledgement by Trump by some of these statements. I hope that that's off the table for Ukraine. But then there's also the issue of the new regions. And we hear Gary talk about land swaps. Everyone's saying all of a sudden land swap. Where's the Russian conversation on land swaps? I haven't heard it.
We don't know if they did actually have that conversation. We don't know about it.
We don't know. We just know that maybe Witkoff had said this to somebody in the media or somebody, and that all of a sudden it's a thing. And I've not seen anything in any of the Russian commentary on this, any of the reportage or statements by anybody on the Russian side. So like this is and that's so typical because it's floating out the idea that Russia's willing to give concessions,
right?
Land concessions, and of course that makes it sound like Trump's pulled a miracle there by squeezing a land swap out of there somehow. Now I could be wrong. Maybe like the magic man Steve Witkoff is going to come there dangling a land swap at some point next week. But haven't seen it yet. So I have to assume if I haven't seen it, if I'm going to put my money down by trusting, rumors in Washington and the Trump orbit, and then the fact that there's no evidence of it on the Russian side, I'm probably going to bet on the Russians for now until I see it. And I haven't seen it.
It's funny. Later on in that same interview, Lavrov said, well, how about security guarantees for Russia? How about what the very thing that this war has been based upon, getting back to the root causes of demilitarization and denazification? How about our security guarantees? And he just, left that out there. That's, we're talking about the Ukraine's guarantees. How about us?
Yeah, or security concerns is how the Russians frame that. Right. They're not asking for guarantees. Obviously, the guarantee will come in the form of a treaty. A peace treaty at the end of it, but look at so where's the statement that we're not going to do this $100 billion arms deal where the U.S. is going to sell arms to the Europeans via a NATO mechanism? Like where that certainly would be one you could put up there, saying this is not going to help to flood Ukraine with weapons. So we're going to knock that on the head, put that off the side. Don't worry, Russia. That's on permanent hold, and as a signal and a symbol to the Russians saying we're serious now. We're not going to be flooding Ukraine with weapons. So that you're already into the demilitarization conversation with Ukraine, and Russia would like to see a neutral Ukraine. And I think any sensible, in fact, Ukraine's neighbors want to see. I'm sure Hungary would prefer a neutral Ukraine. I'm sure Slovakia. I'm sure the people of Romania would, even if the CIA-controlled government doesn't want a neutral Ukraine. I think the people would. But so that's happening during all of this. That deal is still going forward. So that's real policy. That's real action. It's not rhetoric. That's actually happening. And then we have Ukraine announcing they're going to this $50 billion investment from the West to build drones in Ukraine.
Yeah,
it's like, good luck with that. How you going to get insurance on that factory against Kinshal missiles? I don't think so. And then Macron saying just the last 2 days, there should be no limits to the size of the Ukrainian military. So he's over there pretending to talk peace in Washington, and on the other side of his mouth, arm Ukraine. They need a bigger military force. They need more weapons. So that's not. And then on top of that, Gary, while this is going on, what are the Ukrainians doing? Well, everything in their power to derail negotiations. They struck a Russian pipeline, and now have cut off supplies of Russian oil that was going through Ukraine to supply Hungary and Slovakia. Right? A terrorist attack against infrastructure, oil infrastructure. Of course, we've seen plenty of that around Europe. So Ukraine's clearly not serious about any peace negotiations. So there's so many things. So, but bottom line here is this, and I think this is the main concept. No matter what Donald Trump or Vladimir Putin agree to, in principle, on paper, or whatever, there's nothing to stop the Europeans, the UK, Germany, France, von der Leyen, and Brussels, and whoever from sabotaging it, undermining it, ignoring it. And there's nothing, of course, to stop the Ukrainians from doing that. And who are they working with to carry out these raids? Are they working with U.S. intelligence? Are they working with British intelligence? So is this a case of we having a conversation on the political level, but on the deep state and intel level, you're having active measures and operations going on and militarily that are clearly going to undermine any negotiation, settlement, or ceasefire if there was ever such a chance of that happening. So there's nothing Trump can do. You can't control these or get them to come on side in any kind of collective effort. It's just not going to happen. So it's a dead letter.
Yeah,
it's a dead letter at the end of the day. Having said that, Gary, I still think that they need to keep this top line diplomacy going because it's excellent optics, and it might end up putting pressure on the Europeans and Zelensky to stop, around with the situation. And that's good. I hope we can see more of this. There's already Lavrov confirmed, Russian Foreign Ministry just recently, that last 24 hours, that there is now a meeting booked, and arrangements are being made for Donald Trump to come to Moscow.
Oh, that is it's in play.
Yeah. So again, positive. We like this. And if Trump can keep his discipline in his rhetoric, then that can also be positive. And maybe this is the way forward, is just to, rather than, because Russia's not isolated if they're meeting with the U.S. now. There's no isolation of Putin and Russia. So, but Europe and Zelensky could become isolated if this relationship keeps improving between Washington and Moscow.
I love your idea of that latest military tranche that's going into Ukraine from NATO, bought from us, but going to them, putting that on hold. I think that would be an excellent sign. I love that.
That would be huge. Yeah,
huge.
And that's the kind of show of goodwill. Without making a commitment either way, but just say we're putting that on hold. That shows you're serious, and that's going to make Russia more engaged. And it's also going to put a lot of pressure on these European leaders that are very hawkish in their own way, respectively, and of course on Zelensky, who shouldn't even be in office,
right,
in Ukraine. And that's another problem we don't want to get into.
That's a whole nother show. Come on, yeah, Patrick, love having you on. Everybody, you want to follow him at Patrick Henningsen. He is the host of Sunderwire, and then he has a Substack. Something, what do you want to call it? Account. My gosh, I can't even think of the word. Substack account, patrickhenningsen.substack.com. And then you can follow him on X At 21 Wire. That's why it was
At
throwing
21
me
Wire.
off. Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
love having you on, brother. Love having your insights. You're a good man. We'll look forward to hearing from you soon.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Gary.